We're here, the final episode in this lengthy series on creating a custom door in GDL. At the very beginning, I said I'd try and avoid them whenever possible. Now you got a better understanding of why. If you're going to do them right, there's a lot of setup time. Now you can pick and choose what functionality you include in your own door, depending on the particular task, on its specific purpose. But an all-singing, all-dancing door is a lot of work. And don't forget, once you've created it, you then have to maintain it. We're going to finish off this series talking about 3D levels of detail. We talked about 2D levels of detail in part 13 or episode 51. And we're now going to finish off with the 3D levels of detail. It's another short episode, and at the end I'll recap what we've covered in this series. So something we haven't covered yet is the level of detail in 3D. Open these. These are my Graphisoft doors here, here, and here. These are the doors I've created using the two save as methods, or the two save your geometry methods, and this is my GDL door here and across the back here. If I change the MVO to a detail level, that's low, these doors will update. They're the Graphisoft doors, but the rest of them don't. These two, they just don't respond to the MVO at all. But because the remainder are scripted, I can deal with that. We look at our MVO under detail level of door, window, and skylight. We've dealt with our plan, detail level, but our 3D level of detail is down here, all simplified and schematic. So I need to deal with that, find out what that is. And that isn't the Library Global's 13 request we need to make. It's the LG DW symbol settings. So we can open that, go to our interface, preview the interface, make sure we've got the right one, and we do. After the 3D and section elevation. So we'll search for that. Here it is, 3D and section elevation, and we can see that the parameter we're after is this one here, I, door, MVO, detail level, 3D. And we can also see that the values are populated from an array called st_det_level3d, and it uses these constants. Now we should be able to find these defined in the master script. So we go to the master script. It's a big master script, so I can either search the whole lot or I can do a find. There you go, right down the bottom. So these are my three values, 2 for detailed, 3 for simple, 7 for draft. So even though the constant's called draft, it actually stands for schematic. And in my parameter script, we'll find that they've got a values 2 set up for this parameter using these constants and these definitions in the array. Now, so you don't have to find that every time, write it down somewhere. I've written it down here. So I don't have to find it every time I want to do a door in GDL. So that's one thing, responding to the MVO. However, if you look at the Graphisoft doors, they've also got the option here in floor plan and in 3D of opting to use the MVOs or override them. So we should also mimic that. And they've got a couple of extra options. They've got by MVO, which will respond to the full simplified schematic, which is these options here, or you can turn them off. The parameter we're looking for is I, DW, door window, det 3D, 3D detail level. We want to find out what these values are. And to cut a long story short, it is this macro here, det level DW function macro. Under the detail level DW function macro, we see that they've defined a bunch of options here and declared a values 2 statement in order to get their options for the different levels of detail. They've also included a couple of Chinese ones in here that, of course, we don't need. These constants here that define the numbers that relate to these descriptions are defined in the master script. Now, we don't have to use any of this stuff. We can come up with our own, but to my mind, why reinvent the wheel? Why come up with new names? They're there, but we do adapt them to our needs. What I've done is I've copied across what I need as far as the constant names are concerned. I've maintained their values And I've created a couple of arrays with definitions, and then the index array I've filled with these numbers. Now over in the parameter script, I'll declare my values to. And now when I look at IDW det level 3D, I've got my values there. Now one thing I will change is I'll change the off constant from 4 to 0. And the reason I do that is that if it's 0, it's false, but everything else will be true. So I can do a simple test in my 3D. And here we've got a simple if statement. So if det level is anything but off, so if it's true, and true is anything above 0, or anything not 0, we can do all that. We'll check that. So I can easily check that. Let's have a look at this one. 3D, detail level, off. Right, that's pretty easy. Now I may want to refine that a little bit to ensure I still get my opening lines, but that's the basics of it. I've created another subroutine here, and we'll use that to set our detail level. We need a library global statement, copy across what we've already done, and adjust it to this particular scenario. Now we'll already have a value, so we don't need that. We want to request 3D, not 2D. I'll just change that to 3D. If it's successful, then we swap out our detail level for whatever gets returned from the MVO. We only want to perform this function if the setting is set to MVO level. So if this has been set to MVO, we'll come in and we'll request it from the MVO. Otherwise, we will just use what's there. Now that we've set our detail level, we can choose whether to do a full detail door or a simplified door. Now, a simplified door will still need to follow the same outline, which I have set those coordinates under my frame. So even if it's a simple door, I will still need to go into this frame subroutine, but I will not need to draw the leaf or the indicator. So if it's detailed, I'll draw the leaf and the indicator. My other test I need to do in the frame, where I set my building material, my surface, my pen, and my section attributes, put in my coordinates, draw my warhole, and so I will need to do it here. If I'm drawing a detailed door, I draw all of this, including that. Otherwise, I'll still do a prism, but I'll do it at 0 depth. Oops, I missed my then. Now, is my logic right? No, I don't know. Might be. Looks like it could be. Looks like it could be. How about that, eh? So these are all by MVO. Now, if I change this to full, it should change to full. And it does. I've overridden the MVO to be full. Excellent. Just undo those and we'll change it to a detailed MVO. And now if I override this to be simplified, it should be simplified. And if I change it to be off, it's off. Now, I'm not happy with that logic. I reckon if it's off, it should still maintain that warhole. So the way I would fix that is instead of having this test right at the top here, I'd work it into the logic of these subroutines to make sure that my warhole still gets drawn properly, but no frame or leaf gets drawn. And that's just a matter of working through the logic of that. But you understand the principles now of setting up your selection list for the user as to whether they want to follow the MVO or override it, how you get those values from the MVO, and what those values are, which are these ones here. Excellent. And at the end of it all, what have we got? We've got a door that is fully parametric. So we can not only change the basic sizes of it, have everything stay proportional and correct. We've got various functionality that allows us to adjust certain things. It utilizes the available inbuilt functionality in Archicad. We've got hotspots that make it easy for the user to adjust things. We can also make it respond to our model view options. So low detail. And turn off our opening lines in 3D and have control over it that way. And also in 2D, our parts respond as well. So I can change my opening angle. All of this is linked. I change my building material. The fills update to suit. So we've got a very functional door here now that will serve the purpose of many different variations on the same door with very little work once you've actually put in the work up front. And of course, this will respond in a schedule. So all of these are created with the same door. Anything that's a parameter you can change within the schedule. And because I've used parameters named like the Graphisoft parameter, if I throw in a Graphisoft door, the similarly named parameters, or named exactly the same, will show up properly in the schedule. So I've got frame surface here, which is GS frame map. That's the custom leaf that's saved as, and you can see how the two respond. That's the Graphisoft door, and the rest are this door we've just created. And you can see the variability that you can easily bring into the object. I can change it from within here. Good stuff. And that's a wrap. As you can see, creating your own custom door in GDL is a lot of work. but it could be well worth it depending on the project and use. This has been an extensive series and we've been working through it for almost a year. Can you believe it? And we've covered a lot of ground. In episode 36, I went over a number of doors and windows I've created over the years that I absolutely deemed it necessary to spend time to script them, and it was definitely worth it. The various projects in which they were used absolutely benefited from them. I guess my point is, don't underestimate what's required to script a door, but also don't hesitate if it's the right choice. Allow enough time to do the job properly and perhaps piggyback off Graphisoft macros that already exist instead of reinventing the wheel. Then in episodes 37 and 38, I covered the options to create custom doors, custom door leaves, and custom door handles without scripting. These are quick fix methods that give you limited options and vastly reduced functionality, but they may be suitable for your given scenario. Then from episode 39, we go full GDL. Let's recap what we've covered in the GDL portion of this series, all 17 parts. What we've ended up with is a fully parametric, fully schedulable door that responds to model view options and graphic overrides in both plan and 3D. In episode 39, we started by creating the wall hole for our unusual shaped door. Now, Archicad will automatically cut a rectangular wall hole until you implement your own command, and we covered off how to do your own wall hole. In episode 40, we scripted the door frame using the buffer to reuse coordinates instead of retyping them. And I also showed you how to smooth curves with the prism command. Episode 41, so part 3, we scripted our door leaf. Now I covered the difference between the pen for an outline view versus the pen used for a section cut. I also talked about adjacent surfaces cleaning up and how Archicad or GDL behaves in those circumstances. I also talked about problem-solving techniques when things aren't quite working out the way you expect. How to solve things on the fly. Episode 42, so part 4, I talked about how to generate a circular prism with a circular hole and using the cut poly A to deal with the intersection of circular prisms with other prisms and how to deal with the resolution issue. Number 43. We talked about cleaning up or keeping lines between adjacent geometries using the body -1 command or the model wire command. We also talked about values limitations on your parameters so that your object can't be broken. Installment 44, part 6, I introduced you to the Graphisoft macro map. So this is all the macros that Graphisoft use in their generation of the various doors that they have, and it's quite extensive. But I gave you a brief introduction into that and how you can use, for example, the opening lines macro so that you don't have to write it yourself. You just need to know what values to plug into that macro to get it to work for you. Now, one of the things about GDL is you never stop learning. In fact, in putting together this synopsis, I discovered that I could have used 3 to call the opening lines macro instead of 4, because 4 means mirrored. There you go. Episode 45, part 7, we started looking at how to interrogate the model view options to get your door to display differently in different views using the library global command, looking at the library global's 13 object and how to get it working for you. 46 was all about handles, how to place the handle both sides of the door, and also how to interrogate the model view options, the MVO, for handles. Also some modeling tips when using fixed sizes. When the user doesn't have the option to change sizes, some tricks you can use to speed up your coding in that regard. And we talked about the command NTR, number of transformations. Episode 47, we talked about our dynamic hotspots, both length editing and angle editing, how to get those into your object to make them more usable, more user-friendly. 48, how do you get the fill attributes from the building material you've used in the 3D part? of your object. We talk about that so the user doesn't have to set a different fill for the plan settings. And we also talked about how to interrogate the cut plane height so that your object can respond to that. We also dealt with logic issues and swapping out temporary variables so that you can utilize different sizes with the same code. Episode 49, I touched on the default contour lines that comes with the door object and rearranging your logic to suit your developing script. Inline logic conditional statements, so that's an if statement but without the if, and other 2D scripting tricks. There's some good tips wrapped up in this one. Episode 50 talked about setting the origin and orientation for fills in 2D using the poly2b2 and the poly2b3 command and what the differences between those are and which one you should use depending on your situation. We also talked about how to get the door swing information from the model view option and how to use that in your object. In episode 51, we talked about 2D levels of detail from the model view option, which is a different model view option object than the library globals 13, and some of the values associated with those detail levels. Number 52, so we get into hotspots and hotlines in your 2D to make your object more usable and intuitive, including dynamic opening angle, which is separate from your 3D. Episode 53, we talk about the 2D wall holes, how to deal with the wall thickness and door placement orientation. Bit tricky this one, so I'll give you a couple of tips there. Episode 54, wall lines. What are they? When do you use them? Of course, they're used to respond to model view options and graphic overrides. I also talk about how to interrogate the wall attributes to use with your pens and your fills. And finally, this episode, number 55, part 17, we've talked about 3D levels of detail. That's a lot. If you've watched the entire series, I am well impressed. Well done. Believe it or not, there's more I can talk about with doors, particularly around creating custom leaves with parametric flex. So that's custom leaves that you use in a standard object that will respond to size changes. But we've talked enough about doors for now, right? I think we'll give doors a break, move on to something a little less intense. Next up, how to get your labels to change their code automatically, depending on the object selected. I'll see you there.